we're looking at how to plan when it's impossible to plan. I'm Richard Freeman, keep as ever was possible. Those of you who are joining us live, lovely to see you. Well, I can't see you at all. I don't know why I'm saying that. I've no idea how many of you are there, who you are, but I'm hoping that there's somebody there.
We're virtually seeing you. That's good.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, honestly, it's thousands.
You're imagining people. Good start.
Or if you're picking this up on the replay, where were you? Frankly, no, you're very welcome, and that's good. Is that beeping? Is that beeping?
That's the joy of Future Space. That was the joy of being in a co-working space with actual people on a Tuesday morning. It's outrageous, isn't it?
As long as it's not me, that's all I needed to know. I'm joined by the wonderful Lucy Payne. Lucy, we've worked together for a few years now, and you are a champion associate with Always Possible, one of our very best facilitators and business mentors. But rather than me tell the world about you and get something wrong, do you want to give us a little lowdown on the Lucy story?
Oh, don't try and make me explain what I do. I'm still struggling with this. I do many things. I guess my journey in helping businesses came from, I've run my own business. I've worked for a little pre-IPO startup in San Fran. I've worked for big $1 billion. And I kind of put all that together when I was at Sussex Innovation Centre, obviously just up the road. I'm missing the sea. When I helped loads of businesses with the Catalyst team, getting students and graduates to have the most amazing experience while nurturing all these businesses by being their extra pair of hands. And that, you get really spoiled when you're part of all these companies' journeys. It's really quite addictive. So I now live in Bath. So behind me is Future Space at the University of West of England. And I'm doing the same thing here. I head up Tech Swindon. I also do lots of amazing projects with the Southridge. We've worked with the creative industry. I'm working on Breakthrough, which is Sussex, with solo entrepreneurs. Just being that sounding board, listening to people, unpacking it all. I love business model canvas. I'm quite a visual thinker, as you are as well. But being a little part of someone's journey and helping them in a small way at a moment in time is incredibly fulfilling, and I love doing it. And you end up building an amazing playbook, don't you, of all the experiences and all the overlaps, because everyone thinks it's just them. I think it's the key thing that comes across, isn't it? Is it just me struggling with this? No, it's really blimmin' hard running your own business, and nobody tells you how.
Absolutely. No, we're all on our very special mission to change the world in our own unique way, and the crashing reality is it's all been done before. It's all being done by lots of other people, and sometimes the realization of that's first a bit overwhelming, but it's helpful when you do realize that. So your Future Space, obviously you've got random triangles and beams of light coming out your head. That is the future of work as we know it, and that's also very exciting. So thank you. Better than my drab curtain. So this morning we are looking at projects and products. So in the previous sessions we've looked at data, we've looked at fundraising and sort of pitching a case for support for investment. Now we're looking at the delivery, the operational side. What is it that you need to be thinking about in these crazy times when thinking about an innovation and an adaptation of a particular product or service, when taking something new to market, or maybe just thinking differently about your business model or your delivery model around a particular aspect of whatever it is your business serves. And as always, we'll use the word business, but everything we talk about is completely useful, we hope, to charities and social enterprises and even many sole traders and freelancers. Actually, you'll be thinking about your offer into the world, and even if you haven't got a big team behind you, I think a lot of what we talk about will be relevant. And as ever, we're going to try and cover everything in half an hour, 25 minutes, and we'll fail. So we will scratch the surface, but let's do that with some flair and hope that there are some takeaways for people. So my first question to you, Lucy, and it's a big question, and it's a question I ask if ever I'm doing some training with pre-starts or startup businesses or solopreneurs or people that are very early stage. And it feels like a tricksy question, but it's not intended to be. I'm genuinely interested in what people think. But what is the point of business? What's the point of it? Why create an entity that is legally separated from the human? This thing, this vehicle, this organization that is existing in the world. For what? Why? What's the point?
Isn't that a very personal thing for each individual entrepreneur? Because I think there's the really unsexy thing you ask everybody who's just starting out is why, and also what's the end game, which feels desperately unromantic because you're kind of getting into this, I'm going to start a business, isn't it desperately exciting? The key theme seems to come out a lot is like not working for the man, doing it for me, having that itch, but you've got to find your why. When good old Simon Sinek, his best thing is to start with why. Because if you're starting a business and don't really know why, you probably have a beginning of a problem there. You've got to really have a fire in your belly to want to do it for yourself. It's so much easier to work for the man. We don't. We are these mad people who don't do that because it feeds our creativity. But you've got to start at the beginning and go, why is this more than just a side hustle? Or maybe it still is as well. But why start a business? And then I think you've gone.
No, you can.
I think you're also then got to be really honest, which we're going to get to about why you shouldn't start a business and why you're probably all the things you're not very good at, even though you might have this idea, especially on the product-based side. A lot of people, especially in the technical, can build a wonderful thing, but that's all they can do. Dyson's a great example. Go to building widgets.
Yeah.
But you then need the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and widgets are important. But I mean, you're obviously right. The reasons for setting up a business and your personal why are personal. It's a subjective thing. And there are some people who will never, ever set up, lead, manage, a business in their life. And they might have very good reason for doing that. They might not feel that they've got the confidence or the capacity. But there are others who feel it's a calling and that's what they're doing. There are others that kind of stumble into it. But I'm going to put out there that I think there are, if you to boil it down into an objective reason as to why businesses exist, and I think if you look over the kind of the history of business, then people would have put different reasons in different times. I think in the Industrial Revolution, I think the reason for creating a business would be different to how it maybe was in the kind of Reagan, Thatcher 80s. Which might be different to what the purpose of business is now. But I think if you were to boil it down, businesses should do two things. They should create value, and that's economic, social, aesthetic. That's what you're talking about, the kind of why. Putting something out into the world that's not there, and they should solve a problem. And every business should be solving a problem. And if a business is just people talk about a vanity project, or it's just there to serve the kind of the ego of an individual, that business probably won't last that long. It needs to be solving a problem. It needs to be addressing a need that other people want, that they're willing to collaborate with, to buy from, to recommend, to advocate for. And if you don't have that problem defined, then I don't think your business is doing anything. And so I'm quite interested today to talk about those problems. We're talking about projects and products. Now, I think you create a project to solve a problem, to seize opportunity, or you create a product so that people can buy it, so that it solves their problem. What do you think about that? I mean, what if you're trying to solve a problem through a business, where should you start?
I think a lot of people start with an assumption, which is not where you should be. I think a lot of people assume that people want what they're going to be building. We talked about this before, and they assume it's unique. They've got this idea that nobody else has got, and they're just going to go out there and put it in the world. And I like the whole MVP, minimum viable product. Get it out there and test it. A lot of people wait because they're terrified of putting their product or their solution out there in case the world doesn't love it. It becomes their baby, and then they don't want to put their baby out in case everyone says it's ugly. So I think you've really got to unpack that research element of this and go, I think this is a good idea. Who else has done it? Because it's not unique, but who else has done it? How have they done it? What could we do better? There probably will be, the old VHS Betamax. There's quite often the early to market who maybe do it when we're not ready for it. There's so many examples of that. So what can you learn from everybody else who's in your space?
Yeah.
But competitor analysis, we talked about this, but again, be really aware of your competitors and what they do and how they do it and what their essence is and their value proposition is, and then what yours will be and how it will be different, how you'll stand out. So keep an eye on them. But as you said earlier, Rich, don't get obsessed with them. Before we went live, we were talking about competitors are they're fascinating, aren't they? They're a whole rabbit hole to go down. But you must still do your research. You've got to have a robust business plan, even if you're not going to get the funding, or you've got to justify why this is a good space to inhabit. And if there is a space, and if there's a huge space, why?
competitors are brilliant kind of benchmarks around your position in the ecosystem, in the marketplace. And I love collaborating with competitors. I love, looking at what competitors are doing, but you shouldn't define yourself by them. If your whole offer is we're not them, then they've already won that competition.
Or we're cheaper than them. We don't want that either.
No, cheaper than them, faster than them, whatever. Just do the thing that you're doing the best that you can. And as you say, research is integral. The cliche is, Edison didn't wake up one morning and invent the light bulb. It took him many years to invent 999 failed patents until he arrived at the light bulb. He invented 1,000 mistakes before the light bulb came through. Because that research and development, that trial and error, that sense of, I know there's a problem here. The problem is that we can't cheaply and safely power our homes with electricity, but he was convinced that there was a way to do it, and he made 999 ways that weren't effective or safe, but he eventually came across it. And I think that mentality within our business world is really important when we're looking at products and projects. Try stuff out, take it out there.
You've got to be really resilient, though. You've got to be ready to hear why it's rubbish or why it doesn't work, because that is this gold dust, isn't it? As soon as you get those, either it's your early adopters, your beta tests, or you're doing the sort of the group work or whatever, however you get your product or service out there, it's that those first pieces of feedback are so valuable because it's raw, and you've got to be open for that. The worst thing you have is those people who are so convinced, and as you say, maybe it is an ego project which will never go anywhere because they don't listen to the things they don't want to hear. And also, you can't say, the other thing people do is go, this is for everybody, or my competitors are in that space, so that's where it lives. Try and find your own space, be defined. As you say, own what you do, love what you do. If you're developing it for you, go and find more yous. Don't be afraid to be really niche. Because if you're saying this is for everybody, how do you market or sell or explain that to anybody?
Yeah. And
go on.
We're going to look at marketing in a couple of weeks' time in a lot more depth. But you're absolutely right. Know whose problem you're solving. Know what their problem is, and expect that to change. I mean, I think the biggest thing about the pandemic that I've learned is that the problems, not just what our customers have, but also though we are here to help other businesses be as best as they can be, and their clients needs have changed.
Yep.
And we've got a lot of people come to us saying we've been doing this thing for 10 years, but we now know that people need us to do something different. Where do we start? And it's like, well, make sure you absolutely properly know what it is that they want. Listen really hard. Look at how that need has changed, rather than sort of stubbornly cling on to what you.
And we're still in flux. That hasn't finished yet.
No,
but you know what? Also, everybody is more willing to talk about it. So I think it's like, again, it's golden opportunity because everybody's in flux to go out to your audience, to go out to your, as you say, competitors. I don't believe in competitors either. I agree with you. It's all around collaboration and kind of peaceful coexistence in a space. But go out and talk to people about all your customers. If you've got a customer database, go and ask them how they're feeling, how they've changed, what they're doing, so you can evolve with them. Because people are probably more open for that than they've ever been. Because we wouldn't discuss it. We're all feeling quite vulnerable still. This has been a very weird 18 months. It's going to be at least another 6.
Yeah.
So how do we make the most of that without sounding too, opportunist?
I hope it's not just a window, and I hope it's actually this is I've got a chapter coming out in a book in a few weeks, which I'll definitely plug in the next one, which is all about how can business be better. I've written a really optimistic, rose-tinted, I think business behavior and business in how businesses work together can be so different because of what has happened in this pandemic. But I think right now there is more openness. There is a little bit more sharing. There's a little bit more vulnerability, which we didn't have after the last crash when everyone retreated and went protected their little bit. And there is investment out there and there's some money out there. And we've got a question from Keith about funding. Yeah. Keith, we looked at funding a fortnight ago, so it might be worth looking at the replay to that, because it probably answers your question in more depth. But it's a good question. Keith, we put off looking for raising funds because that takes up so much time when should he be spending the time actually building the business. I might answer that first and then come to you, Lucy, because I think you've probably got a longer answer and a more informed answer. But I think absolutely build your business. Look at the problem you're trying to solve. As I keep saying, make sure that as a solo entrepreneur, you're so confident in what it is that you are able to do, even if some of the mechanics aren't there, the tools aren't there, and you need some investment. Get those ducks lined up, and investors, if they're worth their salt, it'll be a really easy decision for them to make. Otherwise, you're going to be spending all of your time trying to impress some people without really much substance behind it. And you'll lose valuable time in talking to your potential customers. That's what I would say. Lucy, am I wrong?
No, you're not, weirdly, unsurprisingly. And I'm currently, as you know, I'm heading up an Innovation for Growth fund right now. And actually, everything we've just been talking about for the last 15 minutes directly applies to a good grant application. We need your narrative. We need to know who you are, why you are. We need to know your competitive analysis. We need to know your market presence, which isn't my market is worth 5 billion globally. No investor wants to hear that. They want to know, they want to have it narrowed down to what's going on in my region with my target market. The other thing that grants often ask for is, what's the innovation? What are you doing? What's the research and development? So all those blocks, which you do as a good business person, if you're kind of you've got to have your pitch. We'll go back to business model canvas here, aren't we? You've got to have your value proposition, your customer segmentation. You've got to understand your market. You've got to understand your competitors. These are all the pieces you should do when you're doing your business model canvas, and you're right at the beginning, kind of brainstorming this product or this project, all of which you can almost cut and paste into a deck, a pitch deck, or into a grant application. That's all someone like Innovate UK or the ERDF funding, which is also kind of petering out now. This is what they want to see: is you're credible, you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who you're doing it for. Yeah. So actually, Keith, all those things hopefully should be a part of your business as usual activities as you almost question yourself as to why you're doing it. Because this is what this is all about, isn't it? Taking a step back.
Yeah.
And not just being busy.
And show that your thing's viable. I think for my business, and we had a number of very small investors come on board at different points over the first few years. But for me, I didn't want to take anybody's money until I've proven I could sell something.
Yeah.
So until I had a product that people wanted to buy, and then gave me the feedback, not just about what it was, the experience of buying it and how it helped them, but then the kind of long-term outcomes of that, because I'm working in a service space. That then, validated, rather than just asking people and them saying, "Yeah, no, I buy that on principle," and then you build a business and get millions of investment, and then maybe that principle is no longer there. Prove it, show, build something, as Lucy said, your minimum viable product, something enough that people will want to buy, and then you can develop it. And those early adopters will be your best critics, they'll be your best supporters, far more than, and they'll be more useful than any competitors.
And actually, all that work is also great for your sales and marketing, which obviously linking to Meg in a couple of weeks' time. But if you can't explain yourself really simply to an investor or to a VC, that whole kind of elevator pitch, you won't get anywhere with anything on the sort of the product or the project, because you're too close. You almost have to dumb it down and get those hooks and simplify it and have different messages for different people. And that is such a great exercise, but it is really hard to do it yourself as a solo entrepreneur. So it's really good to get, we like business model canvas, get in with somebody and map that all out and have somebody ask you why and really challenge you. Because I was doing some work with somebody last week, so I did business model canvas by myself and I found it a bit dry. It's like, but that's because it's a conversation. It needs to be, you need to have someone who isn't related to you, who doesn't work for you, who can come with a very independent but challenging perspective to poke around and really make you uncomfortable with all the assumptions you've made, because you will have done, and push you, because that's what a VC will do. That's what a grant application do. We've knocked out people who, that it's too risky, or they just haven't told. There's a couple that failed because their stories were weak. And these assessors and VCs have got a minimum amount of time. They're skim throughing things and just going, do I get it? And that's marketing generally, isn't it? But it's also, you've got to wrap your product out there and hope people get it.
And feel confident in it. And that's what we do, isn't it? At Always Possible. Our job is to help people get rid of the fluff, is to be really clear about what it is that they're doing next. And we'll talk about now, next, and later plans in a minute, I think, which is something.
Well, it all makes it become less overwhelming. I think that's the other key thing, is when as I'm hearing sort of Keith's question, is that it's overwhelming. There's always a million things you can do. So by really breaking putting a structure and a strategy into everything that you're delivering and putting timelines on it, it's almost giving yourself a break, because otherwise
Yeah.
you've got no headspace in this model, have you? You're just running around from conversation to conversation, and that's a surefire way to not have a healthy business or a good work-life balance, which again we are talking about a lot more now, and I can hope that continues.
But the worst word I think that an entrepreneur can listen too hard to is the word should. And I remember, when I was setting up, you should do this, or you should do that, or you should meet so and so. You should, and it's a lot of pressure, because should feels like, well, if you don't do that, you're then making a conscious choice that could damage your business because somebody has advised you. And I think if you can just turn the shoulds to coulds, and then use some tools to make some judgments, you've got to prioritize your time, and you cannot do every should. And just treat every should as a possibility rather than as a pressure. That can feel a little bit less overwhelming.
And a lot of shoulds aren't in our comfort zone. Also, sorry, I was thinking a lot of the should list is you might have 20 things, 5 of which you're really bad at doing.
Yeah.
As a founder, because that's the key thing as a founder, Yeah. So how do you get rid of those? How do you delegate, which could be an intern, it could be a freelancer, there's very flexible ways of getting support, but it might be incredibly essential, that should, but it's going to take you 5 times as long as somebody knows what they're doing. Get a bookkeeper, get someone who loves social media, whatever it may be, but be really brutal about what's the best use of your time. If you love making widgets, make widgets and go and hire yourself a salesperson, because you're probably not very good at selling it. Just a generalization there.
Well, no, I think it's really important. Yes, I mean, I've still got things on my should list going back 6 years. I'm never going to create that detailed 10-month cash flow forecast. There are other people who can do that better than me. But this comes to the conversation on tools, and I think that you talk about the business model canvas. Now, there will be some people who are very familiar with it. I think it's been one of those great open source tools that invented a few years ago, but it's nothing more complicated than a few lines and squares on a page. But I think that it's a tool that's been adopted around the world. But there'll be people who don't know it and haven't used it and are yet to discover it. So I want to think just for a few minutes, but more broadly about tools to adopt early on. And I know that there are some tools that we as a business now use, and when we advise some of our more established business clients to use, that we didn't use at the start, maybe a bit more sophisticated, some integrated project management tools, internal and external communication tools, and there's 1,000 different bits of software that do incredible things and are better at talking to one another now. And they shave time and money off a week. But when you are starting out, that's probably, or even when you're looking at a new project or a new offer, and it's in that R&D phase, you don't want to spend a fortune on lots of sophisticated tools that take as much time to set up as they do delivering anything. So other than with a pen and a piece of paper, which is sometimes the best starting point, what tools do you recommend people could start with?
I think people should also think about tools for growth, because everyone has Excel spreadsheets at the beginning, don't they? And it becomes a big beast. I like things like Trello. I like really visual project management boards. I think it's managing yourself is the issue when it's just you, whether you have, because most people are just busy, and you ask them what they actually did, there's nothing actually monitoring that. They're just busy. So having a tool like Trello, which is free, Calendly, so you can get your meetings sort of scheduled more intelligently, HubSpot, which is a CRM, which is free. I recommend, quite often when I'm speaking to people, is to plan for growth. So get those tools in place at the beginning, most of which are free. And as you say, they all talk to each other. Slack is amazing once you start getting freelancers or teams, and just build, but also be honest with yourself as to what you're going to use. Some people hate all that. So you might just be using Google Sheets. If that makes you happy, at least that's better than an Excel spreadsheet, making sure it's all in the cloud. So really simple things. But I think having tools that give you visibility of all the plates you have spinning and make you feel in control of them is probably number one, isn't it? To get rid of that overwhelmed, I can't cope with this, there's so many things I should be doing, but it's parents' evening tonight, or I actually need a week off. How do you use tools to make your life easier and your path clearer? So again, I'd probably map out the tools and go, what are you really struggling with? Xero is a great example, isn't it? You don't want to be doing accounting. Get rid of that one.
Well, I think it comes down to your sort of, be honest with yourself about where your strengths are. What's and it goes back to the reason for setting up a business. Set up a business because the problem you want to solve is an engineering one. So you might be a fantastic engineer. Well, that probably means that you aren't the best, social media marketeer or the best, at putting together a balance sheet. So find the areas where you need tools rather than just get a load of tools in place, because
that's a great distraction tactic. I'm going to spend a week building a lovely tool. I mean, this is also I could get my MVP out, but you know what, there's a lovely rabbit hole of spending some time productively getting myself on all these different platforms. Meg's right, they all have very different styles. I mean, we love Business Model Canvas, we're very visual thinkers. Get me a whiteboard and post-it notes, I'm in heaven. Some people like to write a really in-depth business plan. You've got to be honest about your own characteristics and what floats your boat. You might want, some of them are quite feel quite old-fashioned. Some are traffic lighted, aren't they? So it's really up to you to find the tools that work for you. But yeah, don't adopt too many, because that is a great distraction tactic, which a lot of founders do, especially when there's a little bit of runway. Is you can get distracted by shiny things rather than actually getting the work done and getting that product out there or that project started.
And then again, I come back to the characteristic of something, like the characteristic of, what's a business there for? I think it's to solve problems and to create value. What's a tool there for? A tool is to help you turn a system or a whole process or a big load of tasks into a project that's broken down. A tool helps you to categorize things so that you're not looking at everything all at once, and it helps you to order things so that you're not trying to do them all at once. And then underneath that, you've got other bits of bells and whistles that make things a bit easier. But that's all it's doing.
Yes.
So even if you don't have a budget for a fancy tool, just think about how to turn your challenge or your development period into a project. And it's what we call the kind of, we use something called a now, next, and later plan. And there's lots of ways of being able to reverse engineer something. Start with the goal at the end. Ask yourself loads of questions. Every question you can about how you might get,
and be honest with the goal as well, because some people are like, actually, I want to work 2 days a week, or I want to I spoke to a lady the other day, I want to be able to buy my house. That's her goal. So how we work it back from that. Not everyone wants to run a business and manage people. It's, people are a pain. That's, but as soon as founders start employing people, that's normally when they get, the extra level of grumpy, because time, money, and people are always the problems, aren't they, when you run a business? But be honest about what the business needs to be for you.
So don't launch a product or a service or commit yourself to something that you cannot deliver in 2 days a week. And that takes a lot of. But you have to break that down. You have to go, right. So how long will it take to get to this point? If I'm not doing it, who is? Where will the planning, the marketing, who's going to the invoice? All of that stuff. And if you break all that down, then you can start to work out, well, what is a kind of a planning task? What's a doing task? What's going to bring the money in? What's a kind of nice to have? Start to categorize that, and then you can go, right, well, this is what I need to do the next month or so. This is a kind of 3 to 6 month thing, and that thing will happen at some point, and I'm going to park it. Just doing that, even on a piece of paper, you suddenly start to feel, okay.
And be honest about what sort of person you are. Are you a box shifting person? Do you need a nice tight schedule? Do you need to tick off your to-do list? Or are you a plate spinner? Would you get really bored if you had a structured to-do list and you actually like to do tangents, but you just need to make sure those are focused?
Yeah.
And you might have to ask someone you work with potentially about that, or your other half, if you're not quite sure what sort of person you are. But be really honest about how your brain works.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what time you work,
We've got about just over a minute left. So if anyone's got a burning question that's not yet been asked, thanks to Dan and Meg for your comments rather than questions, but they're really, really helpful. Get it in now. Otherwise, I guess in this last minute, if we kind of to summarize, it's work out what problem it is you're trying to solve. Get your tools in place early on. Work out what tools are right for you. Work out who you are, why you're doing this. Listen to people. Talk to people. Kind of validate that thing that you want to do, stress test it, but fundamentally, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Definitely.
That's a bigger thing. So many people do this on their own. And that's
the amount of times we talk to people and I say, do you have someone who holds you accountable? Do you have a mentor? And people say no. It's like, go and find one. Get on LinkedIn. Ask a friend. Ask a businessman who's maybe in a similar area, or woman. Go and find someone to help you.
Yeah.
Because people love to be asked for help.
Yeah,
it's not a sign of weakness.
Yeah, absolutely not. And we've got bags of help and lots of ways to do it at alwayspossible.co.uk. So do check that out. In 2 weeks' time, we've got the lovely Meg Fenn, who I know is listening in today, and we're going to be delving into marketing and design and all things communications, how you get people to hear about your product and service and to build kind of those audiences that become your champions. There's a dark art to it, but it's all straightforward when you get your head around it. Lucy, thank you so much. Great
That
stuff.
zoomed by. We said it would. Thank you. It was great fun.
It's so quick, but we're out of time. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and see you in a fortnight, same time, same place.